Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Hey, guys.
Good afternoon.
Hey, nice to meet you. Hi, go. First time seeing each other.
Same, yes.
Yeah.
Nice meeting you too.
Hey, Hannah, it's been a while.
Yeah, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. What have you been up to?
Um, a lot. I've started a master's and I just got back home to visit family, so it's been a kind of chaotic week. But yeah, it's been good.
Okay, great. Well, I'm happy to hear that. I'm happy to hear that. Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. I think my colleagues should log in any minute now before we can get started. And I'm gonna try to give them a call. I'll be right back.
Where are you getting your master's?
So it's a joint master's between the University of Groningen and the University of Las Palmas de Gran Canaria.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, it's actually in island studies, which is niche and fun, and continues to relate to coastal environments, which is what I focused on during my Fulbright. So, yeah.
With whom did you work at the University of Ghana? I just spent the last year at UG.
Ah, cool. You know Dr. Yabo Afo? He's
Yes.
at the
Yeah.
Center for Climate Change and Sustainability Studies.
Okay. Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fantastic facility there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Were you there for the whole year or?
Yeah, I was, but I was a little unlucky in that I got there around the time of the strikes, so it wasn't I was there in spirit, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Yeah, I was there the this previous or this academic year technically,
Mhm.
and we got some strikes in when was it in can't remember if that was December or January, but yeah, they were annoying.
Mm. Yeah, I got caught up for a long time because I was waiting to get IRB approval from the ethics board, but they couldn't meet for months. So I was sort of like
Oh,
twiddling my thumbs, like, can I interview people? Can I not? Like,
yeah,
yeah,
that's rough.
yeah. That's okay. It all worked out in the end.
Did you stay on campus or did you rent an apartment in town?
I rented an apartment in town. Yeah.
Okay, okay,
Did you
very
stay
good.
on campus?
Yeah, I stayed in the Denmark house. They have kind of a master suite with its own bathroom, and I've stayed there several times previously and kind of like it, like being
Very
on
cool.
campus.
Yeah.
I mean, Heiko. Excuse me just a second. All right, back on. Uh-oh, we lost somebody.
Hmm.
So while you were at UG, you must have done a lot of work along the coastline there, or?
Yeah, so I did all of the field work in the like kind of the Volta region and Ada, and then also in the Western region. So a lot of the time I was actually like away from University of Ghana. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, it was a good experience. I sat in on a few classes and just tried to kind of be part of the campus as much as possible, even though I wasn't really physically there a lot of the time.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I like the Volta region a lot. I've done research in the Volta region since about 2016 and Ada, that area. Well, actually,
Yeah.
my background right now is I think was big Ada.
Yeah. Very cool. All right, where are you right now?
Oh, it's tricky. So I'm a professor at St. Cloud State University, Minnesota, but I'm currently on sabbatical in Southern California.
Oh, nice.
So
Very
I
cool.
was fretting a little bit about what particular time this meeting was today because
Yeah.
I've been traveling through so many time zones.
Yeah.
So. And so you said you just were visiting family at home. So you're in the US right now, or are you back in Groningen?
Yeah, right now I'm in the US. I'm in New York at the moment. But in the fall I'll return to the Netherlands.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I think they're having some technical issues, maybe.
Yeah, they just logged in.
Okay.
Okay.
Hello?
Yes.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Good. Okay, you got everybody? You got everybody, Papi?
Yes, yes.
Huh?
We can get started. Can you guys hear us well over there?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Series 7 of the Enrichment Seminar. As you may already know, the goal and the object of this seminar is to come up with a topic which will be introduced to the Fulbright participants, who will then make a presentation of it, and then obviously we'll invite guest speakers specialized in that area who will come attend the presentation, give feedback, and then we'll have a Q&A session afterwards. So today, allow me to welcome our guest speakers. We have Professor Ousmane Sen from WARC. He's currently the director of the West African Research Center in the Senegalese capital. Professor Sen earned his BA and MA in English at the University Cheikh Anta Diop before going to France in 1980 with a Senegalese government scholarship to pursue his PhD research and studies both at the Université de la Sorbonne Nouvelle, Paris 3, and at the celebrated École Normale Supérieure of Saint-Cloud. He returned to Senegal in 1983 as faculty in the Department of English, where he taught African American and African literature. After chairing the Department of English for over 10 years, and while still teaching in the same department, Prof. Sen started developing and consolidating his activities in Senegal as a study abroad programs director for several US universities, including the University of Minnesota, Michigan State University, Mount Holyoke College, Wells College, and etc. So he's one of the most experienced study abroad programs managers in Senegal. Welcome, Prof. Sen. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to tell everybody, my presence is going to be protocol, but so that it would be a good thing for me to say a few words for letting Dr. Mamadou Boja and Ayun enter the conversation and, moderate the conversation on this topical subject. Right now, when I think back to the time when I was much younger, running between and villages, going maybe less than a mile away from my family house and looking at all the tall trees, all the fruits we could just collect from the bushes, I realized that maybe man may change because villages, small towns, and cities do grow. And this is documented by the current situation where I was born. At the same time, you realize that you don't have the same green environment you used to have. And right now in Dakar, there is not one drop of rain that has hit the ground yet. And when I was in primary school, by May, you would have rain, and by July, everything was green, which I particularly like about rainy season, to see that everything is green now, everything is gray, yellowish. So things are changing. But at the same time, I was thinking about it. Hey, wait a minute. We talk about the Sahara Desert, but excavation made in the Sahara Desert by anthropologists, historians, and everything show that maybe millions of years ago, people lived there, and there was certainly some climate change then, which may turn that area into a desert, which a reason to say, well, cool it, this is a natural phenomenon, it will come and pass. It is not going to come and pass because there are many more people on this globe, many more industries, many more fields to farm. So the situation indeed is very, very serious, even more serious in a continent like Africa, where I always say the phenomenon is here, but people do not necessarily have the technical scientific tool to face it. So this is a great challenge, and I am glad that you are here to discuss it, and I'm very honored to have African Research Center as the center of all of this. And you Fulbrighters, whether you be ETA or research or Fulbright teaching in any of our countries, it is a privilege, it is an honor for us to have this program run from here. And please, whenever you planning on other trips and coming to Senegal, make sure that you check us out, whatever we can do. We certainly will do to help you and make your job easy, the same way as I am sure Dr. Mamadou Boyan sitting here and Adiun right there are trying their level best to make you comfortable. So again, as usual, since we are in the country of China, to tell you, welcome, bienvenue, and we hope everything is going to unfold smoothly. And allow me at any time to vacate this space and leave a room for you, Mamadou Bojan, and I to continue the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Sen. Okay. All right. So next we have Dr. Mamadou Bojan, who will be our next expert. So Dr. Mamadou Bojan is a researcher at the Social Studies Lab of the Institut Fondamental d'Afrique Noire, IFAN, at Cheikh Anta Diop University of Dakar. He's the coordinator of Fulbright Fellows in West Africa at work in Dakar, and he received his PhD from the University of Florida, and he's the founding Sahel Research Group member. So for our Fulbright speakers today, we have Dr. Heiko Schonfuss. Did I say it right, Heiko?
Very good.
Okay. So for nearly 30 years and in over 140 publications, Dr. Schonfuss, a professor and the director of the St. Cloud State University Aquatic Toxicology Lab, has focused his research on the effects of contaminants of emerging concern on aquatic ecosystems. He has led multi-agency research projects to improve water quality across the US and abroad. He has successfully advised over 40 graduate students and is an editor for environment toxicology and chemistry, as well as the journal Water. In 2023-2024, he served as a U.S. Fulbright Scholar at the University of Ghana in the Institute for Environment and Sanitation Studies. Dr. Schonfuss is the past chair of the CETAC Endocrine Disruptor Testing and Risk Assessment Steering Committee, and he has served on the EPA Science Advisory Board. Last but not least, we have Hannah. Hannah is a 2021 graduate of New York University, Abu Dhabi, where she took a sociological approach to investigating environmental action. She completed her Fulbright grant in Ghana in 2023, hosted by the Center of Climate Change and Sustainability Studies at University of Ghana.
To turn off her microphone.
Who?
Jen, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Her research focused on...
Somebody's talking over you. Somebody's talking over you. Don't know who it is.
Okay. Is it good now? I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so her research focused on shifting socio-ecological systems and the experiences of coastal residents in light of climate changes and environmental degradation. Right now, she's pursuing a master's on social sciences in island and sustainability, and she's interested in interdisciplinary approaches to coastal environmental justice, particularly in island settings and the blue economy. So the way we will try to organize the setting is, I think, Heiko, if you don't mind, you will go first. So you have 15 minutes for your presentation. And then after that, Hannah, you can go. And the same thing, you'll have 15 minutes for your presentation. And once both of your presentations finish, the guest speakers can give you their feedback, and then we'll engage in the Q&A session. All right, so Heiko, whenever you're ready, I'll give you the go. All right,
wonderful.
Go.
Thank you so much. Can you see my full screen here?
Yes, I can see it.
All right. Thank you again for the invitation to participate in this Fulbright Enrichment Seminar series today, and for everybody else to attend. I think the previous speaker already mentioned some of the environmental challenges that sub-Saharan Africa faces. And I want to just use an example today from my own experiences while being a Fulbright scholar in Ghana to highlight some of the complex issues surrounding environmental degradation. In this case, I was, let's forward here. There we go. I was at the University of Ghana, Legon, from fall 2023 through spring 2024. You see some images here of the capital in the middle, and then Balmy Library at the university, and then the main campus track. My plan initially was to update the ecotoxicological graduate curriculum at the University of Ghana and study contaminants in the Volta and Odo River. This is work we started in 2016, and the plan was to continue that. And we accomplished both of those objectives. But one of those opportunities arose. That's why the title of my presentation is Right Place, Right Time for All the Wrong Reasons. It turned out that the summer and early fall of 2023 was exceptionally wet in the headwaters of the Volta River that feeds Lake Volta, that is held in place by Okosombo Dam in Ghana. It is the largest man-made lake in sub-Saharan Africa. And climate scientists attribute this exceptional rainfall in the headwaters of the Volta River to climate change and changing weather patterns. So my arrival in Accra coincided with the Volta Lake reaching a historically high level, and the danger was that the dam would actually overflow because of all the incoming water. And so the very difficult decision was being made to conduct an emergency release of water from Akosombo Dam. Unfortunately, this emergency release, which reached peak levels of 5,800 cubic meters a second, that's the equivalent of 2 Olympic swimming pools being released every second, resulted in flooding downstream of low-lying fishing communities along the Volta River. And these are some pictures taken a few weeks after the peak flood, and you can see that houses were partially submerged. And on the right side, the city of Mepe, one of the largest communities, was mostly underwater with very extensive damage as a result of the flooding. Now, having just arrived in Ghana, I had actually not paid much attention to the flooding on the Volta River other than it was affecting my fieldwork. But then I received a call from the University Teachers Association of Ghana, UTAG. They were putting together a rapid assessment team to analyze, study, and make recommendations in the aftermath of the flooding, which was still ongoing. So we headed down to the Volta region, to the town of Mepe and Baton, and did a fact-finding trip first to then determine what immediate and long-term steps we needed to aid in the recovery. So this is our group. Prof. Chris Gordon here, the former director of the Institute for Environment and Sanitation Studies at the University of Ghana. who led the effort to some degree. We realized very quickly that the flooding was widespread. This is a map of the flooding. The dark blue is the traditional historic extent of water in the Volta River and some of the backwaters. The light blue are actually areas that flooded. And all told, in the towns of Mepe and Bator, the flooding extended over about 8 square kilometers, displacing somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 people. So this was a major event. It also was a very long-lasting event because the flooding didn't fully recede for about 2 months after the peak water release. Our initial rapid assessment told us that what we needed to focus on, our expertise having to do with water quality, was really looking at the safety of drinking water for the communities that were affected the most by the flooding, so the communities of Bator and Mepe. There were further coastal communities that were also severely affected. And we were particularly concerned about the fetching of water, either from the river itself, as you see in the middle image. This is a young woman carrying water that was fetched from the Volta River, and also the wells and boreholes in these towns that had been inundated with flood water. In other words, during the peak of the flood, the water actually exceeded the height of these boreholes. And so the aquifer was contaminated by water gushing in from above through the borehole and down into the groundwater. So we determined the best way we could help was to actually conduct monthly sampling of the Volta River, starting in November and extending all the way through February 24. And we wanted to measure microbial contamination, heavy metals and pesticides in the river, in the floodwaters in town, and also in those boreholes to gain a better understanding for the public health officials on the safety of water for this town. And I should point out, many of the populations of these towns were actually cut off and had to use boats to shuttle to the main roads because the areas that were not submerged were essentially became islands. So it was very hard for people to get clean drinking water. That's why they had to rely heavily on river water in these boreholes, even though they had been flooded just a few days earlier. I want to jump right to the results, and I don't want to scare you with a big table, but just to give you a little sense, I cut out all the intermediate sampling steps, but these are the first sampling that we conducted on November 1st, and then the last sampling about 4 months later on February 3rd, by which point water quality had somewhat stabilized, and so that was kind of the time period we looked at. All the cells that are highlighted in yellow are measurements that exceeded either the World Health Organization standards for safe drinking water or the Ghana Standard Authority's safety limits for safe drinking water. And you see a lot of yellow, especially during our first sampling event where we sampled stagnant floodwaters in town, 2 boreholes, and also the river water. What stood out, and you see that in this picture down here, these are agar plates that we incubated to look at microbial contamination of these water samples that we collected. We saw extremely high counts across the board in fecal coliforms and total coliforms. So in other words, bacteria and microorganisms related to human and animal feces. Now, that is not particularly surprising because if you look on the right side, a lot of the townspeople rely on cesspools, pits where human waste is being stored and then it slowly drains away. And of course, these being in the lowest parts of town, they were the first places to flood. So in other words, the flood waters inundated these cesspools, freed up the human waste, and that then flowed through town and inundated the boreholes. Now, the drinking water standards are very strict. They're basically no coliform bacteria of any type in drinking water. But in parentheses, I have the levels for treated wastewater. And you see even treated wastewater coming out of a municipal wastewater treatment plant would be much cleaner than what we observed. So clearly, this was not water fit for human consumption. We are pretty certain that these bacterial counts mostly came from these cesspools because our phosphate levels, which you would associate with human waste were very high as well. So we have a direct relationship here. We sampled monthly, and unfortunately, our bacterial counts remained high throughout the entire sampling period. So even 4 months after the main flood had passed, the water was still unfit to drink, especially from the boreholes. And we added additional boreholes that were further away from the river just to see the extent of the groundwater contamination. And again, we still see the very high levels of phosphate, which indicate that the contamination most likely comes from human waste. We also looked at heavy metals, and here the picture is a little better. Again, our first sampling in November is on the left, and then our February 3rd sampling on the right. You see a lot of yellow again in our first sampling. We had a lot of heavy metals that exceeded Ghana Standards Authority and World Health Authority standards for drinking water, for clean drinking water. And, you know, things like lead, cadmium, and chromium, I'm sorry, my slides are jumping around a little bit. When you are trying to identify sources, one of the things we found, and this is very prevalent, especially in Ghana, is the recycling of electronics. A lot of electronic waste, as you probably know, is shipped from Europe and North America to places like Ghana and is then being broken apart for metals that are of value. Lead, of course, is on many of the computer boards as a solder, and chromium and cadmium would be two things that are built into the silicon chips as well. And here's a picture. It's a little hard to see, but it's a whole bunch of electronic waste that was flooded in a little shop in that town that probably engaged in this kind of e-recycling. And so it's not surprising that we saw very high values exceeding far the standards for safe drinking water in our first sampling. Thankfully, by the time of our last sampling, those concentrations had gone back down below the levels that are considered safe for drinking. So that danger had passed by the end of February. We also thankfully did not detect any pesticides in any of our water samples, and we attribute that to being in the dry season where less planting occurs and therefore less pesticide use occurs in the agricultural fields. So a mixed bag. Our microbial contamination remained high. Our heavy metal concentrations went down and below safe limits by February, and we didn't have any issues with pesticides. A big part of Fulbright is, of course, community engagement, and so we felt to honor the commitment of the local public health authorities, but also the homeowners that allowed us to sample their boreholes. We created a flyer that we distributed in Bator and Mepe to inform the public by the end of February of what practices they can engage in to remain safe and have a safe use of water. Clearly, we determined that drinking the water directly from the boreholes or from the river was not safe. However, boiling water would actually make it safe because we only dealt at this point with bacterial or microbiological contamination, which can be treated just through heating. The water was okay for washing and bathing as long as you don't drink it, mostly because our heavy metal concentrations had fallen below safe water levels, so we didn't have to worry about that. Now, I use this example. It's just a snapshot of the complexity of the challenges that contribute to the environmental degradation in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa. Of course, we also have the issues of mining. Solid and liquid waste disposal is largely unregulated. Because of a lack of sanitary structures, we still have open defecation. I mentioned e-waste, which was very apparent in our particular study. In northern Ghana, you have bushfires that can release all kinds of chemicals. And then, of course, in agriculture, agrochemicals, the Volta River is a rice-producing region. And so during the wet season, you have quite a bit of use of agrochemicals as well. So complexity in both sources and effects of different sources of contaminants. I leave it with that, and I thank you for your attention. And here's my email address if you have any questions for follow-up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heiko. Thank you. That was very vibrant and brilliant for our presentation. Hannah, you ready?
Yes, so one moment, let me share a screen.
Okay, no problem. Just whenever you're ready. Thank you.
All right, everyone sees the presentation, right? Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me. My name's Hannah, and I was a 2022 through 23 Fulbright grantee at the University of Ghana at the Center for Climate Change and Sustainability Studies. And I'll be presenting specifically on coastal environmental challenges in Ghana. So to start with, I wanted to talk a bit about why our project focused on coastal areas. And mainly it has to do with that's where a lot of human development and economic activity takes place. So in Ghana, even though the coastal area only makes up about 7% of the total land area, 25% of the population lives there. And additionally, 40% of the national population lives in the 4 regions that border the coast. And with that higher population density, there's also a lot of industry. Fishing is, of course, a major coastal economic activity, as well as the ports and tourism. And coasts globally are a frontline for climate change impact and sea level rise, and are home to complex social ecological systems. And when we talk about social ecological systems, it sort of highlights the fact that human activity does impact the environment, but also vice versa, that as human activity is changing the environment, the changing environment also changes activity, and that the two are actually inseparable. So I wanted to show this graphic from Isaac Boateng's 2012 publication, because I think it does a very good job of kind of outlining the coastline of Ghana. And it shows how previous researchers have split the coast into 3 main segments. So over here we have the west coast with the Ankobra River system and the Amanzuli wetlands. And this area has like a high forest cover and relatively little agriculture. And I also want to point out the east coast here with the Volta River estuary and the Keita Lagoon, which are both very important fresh and brackish water systems. And this area has been exposed to very high coastal erosion. It's actually very fitting that Dr. Schoenfuss brought up the Akosombo Dam, because one of the leading theories for why the eastern coast has been so affected by erosion has to do with the building of the dam altering sediment flow to the estuary and to the coast here. So just to quickly go over the project scope, during my Fulbright, our project focused on the east and west coastal zones. And we interviewed 200 people from diverse backgrounds that included fishermen and fish processors, salt winners, clam divers and clam processors, coconut oil processors, farmers, and more generally residents of high-risk coastal zones that had been evacuated or had to relocate, sometimes even multiple times. And throughout the project, we focused on the human experience of these changing social ecological systems. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was to go into more detail about the rapid erosion that particularly takes place on the eastern coast. So these are photos from a very small estuary island called Izizakpe. And after the building of the Ada Sea defense, sediment deposits were altered, and it led to a sandbank that previously shielded the estuary to erode and exposed the small island to much higher wave intensities from the sea. This led to very drastic erosion. You can see here, I think you can see my mouse, right? Yeah. Here you can see these are actually fallen palm trees that the land used to extend here, and these palm trees were essential to the coconut oil producers living on the island. Not only was that a major pillar of the island's economy, it was also part of their cultural heritage. And a lot of those coconut trees were lost due to the flooding and the erosion that resulted that was the result of the changing sediment budget after the building of the sea defense. And here we see what used to be a family's home that has been completely demolished by flooding and erosion. And additionally to the farmers on the eastern coast, the erosion has exacerbated saltwater intrusion into the groundwater, which affects them in irrigating their crops as well. And the other environmental challenge that spans across the coastlines, both the east and the west and central coast, is the impact of overfishing. So this is a global phenomenon, but with like very severe local impacts. The main impact being that fishermen now have to spend much longer to catch the same amount of fish. The fish are both smaller and fewer, and this has a tremendous impact on people's quality of life as they spend much longer hours at sea and have to take on a much greater financial risk in order to go on a fishing expedition. The cost of fuel became very high the year that I was in Ghana, and that meant that often fishing vessel owners had to sometimes even borrow money to buy the fuel and then risk not being able to break even if they were not able to catch enough fish on that particular fishing expedition. And in the western coast, there was another issue impacting fishermen, and that was sargassum. So the sargassum, for those who might not know about it, is this floating brown algae or seaweed. And there's actually an enormous swath of it across the Atlantic that's kind of referred to as the Great Sargassum Belt, and it touches the west coast of Ghana. And this washes up in huge masses and also sort of hovers in the water, also combining with plastic waste and creating a hazard, especially to fishermen. And there's a specific sort of inequality that emerges in how fishing communities are impacted by the sargassum. So two of the most common fishing methods are purse seine and beach seine fishing. And this little graphic shows how with purse seine fishing, the vessel goes out to sea and the crew selectively casts the net to encircle fish. Whereas with beach seine fishing, the net is cast with the assistance of a boat, but the net is then dragged inwards by people standing on the beach, pulling the net manually in. And the reason this is so significant is because the purse seine fishers have the opportunity to select areas with less sargassum, whereas the beach seine fishers have no way of avoiding the sargassum that clutters the coast. And therefore, they're unable to fish sometimes for weeks at a time, because if they were to cast the net, the weight of the sargassum would be so heavy, it would tear the net and make it completely impossible for them to catch any fish. And I also wanted to talk a bit about Cape St. Paul wilt. This is also known sometimes as lethal yellowing. It involves the leaves of the coconut tree first turning yellow and then wilting, and causing these sort of groves of these headless coconut trees. It's very difficult to control because of a sort of jump spread enabled by insect vectors, and it can be devastating to coconut crops that particularly women who produce coconut oil rely on. And lastly, this again pertains mainly, well, yeah, in Ghana exclusively to the West Coast, is the production of oil and gas, and both the offshore drill sites and the onshore processing plant. So even though these are present mainly in the Nzima territories, in the Nzima area, all oil and mineral assets are owned by the Ghana national government. And so because of that, the Western region doesn't necessarily benefit as directly from its resources as many of the inhabitants feel that they should, especially as they're the ones mainly sort of subject to the environmental changes that come with developing the processing plant and the infrastructure to transport heavy machinery. So here we can see a road being built through the Amanzuli wetlands, where people also fish and rely on that environment. So interestingly, the sort of local lore is that the oil and gas development has caused the sargassum inundation. And I can't find any research that necessarily corroborates a direct causal link, but I will say there is reason to believe that oil and gas, or at least that the fossil fuel industry globally contributes to climate change, which in turn contributes to sargassum inundation. However, there's no, as far as I know, direct link between the two. But this being said, this is the root of a very strong distrust towards oil and gas development in the area because the fishermen have been so heavily impacted by the effects of sargassum. And interestingly, also to note is that the offshore drill sites are no fishing zones. And also because of the lights around the drill sites, they function as incidental fish aggregating devices, meaning that the fish are sort of attracted to the lights, they're attracted to the shelter that the structure provides, and the fish go there where the fishermen are not allowed to access that area, which from the fishermen's perspective, very, very understandably is a major frustration. And from another perspective, could have somewhat a positive effect on the overall population of fish in that they have a sort of accidental marine protected area around the drill sites. So here's some quick works cited, and I wanted to open up for questions and comments, and especially hear feedback. Yeah, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. It's wonderful. Aline? Well, it looks
Hello?
like Ali is...
Can you guys
Okay.
hear me? All right.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm
Yes,
here.
good.
Yeah, very good job, Hannah. Thank you for your presentation. I'm just gonna ask you one thing. Do you mind sending me your presentation? And Heiko,
Sure.
if that's okay with you, I would like to share your presentation both to the Fulbright platform, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
That is, yes,
Okay,
that
thank
is
you very much. Yeah, so Dr. Bodian, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed listening to your presentation. Climate and environmental degradation is a big topic and a big issue in West Africa, and particularly in Sub-Saharan Africa. And over the last few years, and I think if you look at how climate change and resource scarcity associated with this phenomenon are also heightening tensions between communities. So I just want to share a short experience regarding the conflict in Mali, but also that, for example, communities are being challenged by what happened over the last few years. Because as you know, climate issues are one of the main and figures show that, for example, that the vulnerability to climate change, especially in Mali, where communities are impacted by this kind of global warming, and the Sahel region is one of the most environmentally degraded part of the world. And the figures show that, for example, the temperature increases projected to be at a time higher than the global average. And more than 80% of the population rely on traditional agriculture for their livelihood. And some forecasts that rainfall will fluctuate even more in the future, and that frequency of extreme events such as drought or heavy rain will increase. And I think we've seen, for example, what happened over the last few years, including in Senegal, right, with these floodings. But at the same time, countries like, for example, in countries like Mali, the population growth, of almost 3% is amongst the highest in the world. So which means that, the pressure over resources will increase, but also people will be more and more inclined to rely And this pressure over fertile land and water also add a layer of complexity when it comes to regulating, right, how people have access to those resources. And today, if you look at, for example, what is happening, this competition between farmers and herders. I've been running the Central Mali project for almost 2 years. And one of the things that also always come over and over again in people's narrative when it's come to understanding tensions between herders and farmers is control resources. Getting access to water has become one of the main problems. Of course, there's been government to regulate, but also to make sure that land tenure, but also land reforms also benefit herders. But generally speaking, all these land reforms are more beneficial for sedentary farmers, which leaves herders in a very situation because they are the one affected by this this kind of degradation of the environment. And one of the things that also make the situation more complicated is the situation of insecurity. Since 2012, as a result of this jihadi insurgency, tensions between communities. As the state has been on retreat, it left community with no possibility of guaranteeing their security. And there seems to be a sort of security dilemma. You arm yourself or you get killed. And this communities, it's trying to put in place military has been on retreat, has also provided an opportunity for other security providers, militias, but also to position themselves as providers of security. And in the Fulani community, for example, herders who've been disadvantaged, for many years because of these policies that have been implemented by the government, especially in Mali, decentralization, but also land tenure, they found themselves empowered by this insecurity situation. As a result of this circulation of arms, they were able to arm themselves, but also control some resources, including water points and wells. And this is why, if you look at, for example, today, in this context where rainfall are becoming more and more things a little bit more complicated. So listening to you, especially this your presentation in Ghana regarding floodings, which is kind of something very common in Ghana, but I want to turn to your presentation, especially regarding fishing and environmental degradation or climate change, and ask a question. Maybe this is also a kind of broad question that also can be addressed by the first term. And I'm kind of sometimes I get a little bit kind of not confused, but it's not clear when going back to this your presentation on Ghana, right? With the degradation of environment, of course, has seriously on the fishing community in Ghana. And I'm wondering, was this issue I don't know if you can just clarify, for example, how much of this degradation and its impact on the fishing industry is attributed to, natural phenomena or climate change, and how much stems from direct human activity, such as, pollution and overfishing. So I'm kind of curious. Okay, I know that in Senegal there's been a lot of speculations over these two issues, but sometimes it's very difficult to draw the line between, what draws what. So yeah, this is a contribution, but also a question.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and the source of much debate is to what extent are diminishing fish stocks because of climate change or because of overfishing. And I would say that at least globally, most species of fish are overfished. And the decrease in fish landing, fish catch it's something that I think is a global challenge, and I think largely it is because of overfishing. Although climate change is impacting fish migratory patterns, it's impacting a lot of factors in the fish life cycle, and I don't have really a background to talk more about the biological reasons behind it, but from what I've read and seen, overfishing has a huge impact on, especially industrial overfishing, and trawling, illegal trawling, has had a tremendous impact on artisanal fisheries and their ability to sort of keep up. Yeah.
So another question, I'm kind of curious about this flood. Last year, 2 years, over the last 4 to 3 years, there's been this kind of recurrent floodings, with the state really being challenged by this phenomenon, but also finding it very hard to have structural solutions. I know that there are some issues related to sanitation, but also health. I'm just wondering to what extent the Ghanaian authorities are successful in putting in place sound policies when it's come to policies, that are enduring but also sustainable.
Thank you. You broke up in the middle, but I think I got the essence of your question. So, to what degree the Ghanaian government, through regulatory policies, can put measures into place to ensure and improve sustainability and sanitation of freshwater resources. I believe there's a disconnect where the government certainly follows many of the World Health Organization guidelines in setting policies and regulatory measures on what constitutes safe drinking water, on what kind of sanitation structure should be put in place. Unfortunately, because of the lack of connectivity between many of the homes and many of the very fast growing and sprawling towns and settlements, they're very theoretical safeguards and regulatory measures that are hardly ever enforced. And frankly, the local communities have few means to actually achieve those kind of levels of sanitation that would be needed to create sustainable, safe drinking water. So, for example, the towns of Mepe and Bator that I featured in my presentation have no centralized sanitation structures. So everything is based on cesspools. A good part of the town is only a few feet above sea level. And of course, when it floods, the lowest lying areas is where you have the cesspools. So those are the first places to flood. The cost of improving sanitation to build in a centralized wastewater treatment facility would be just about cost prohibitive in a town like that. You would have to displace a lot of people for the pipes. You would have to build pump stations, which, given the common outages to electricity, would probably not be functional as much as they need to. And a modern wastewater treatment plant that would probably eat up billions of dollars just to create a few towns with safe drinking water. So there have been a lot of nonprofits that have worked with the government or independent of the government, trying to develop localized solutions, filtration systems, household filtration systems. Unfortunately, the majority of those are well-intentioned, but they do not take into account the local conditions. It's great to have a filtration system and a pump donated by an NGO, but if the replacement parts cost more than the monthly income of a family, or if they rely on gasoline, as the other speaker mentioned, which has become very expensive, those are not really solutions that are sustainable. So I think there's really a need for rethinking and probably less regulatory action and more practical approaches to help the local communities, inform and educate the local community so that they can make local decisions that hopefully help improve their water quality. But it is a very intractable and very complex problem.
Just a follow-up question out of curiosity. So what about local officials? Are they, what do they kind of, basically getting involved in local civil society, for example?
Yeah. I was very encouraged by that. I have to say, my experience when we worked in that area was we were constantly interfacing with local officials, both elected officials and public health officials. They assisted us in facilitating the sampling. They talked to homeowners for us. They relayed the information that we provided in those flyers to the local community. And they very much understand that in order for their communities to move forward, safe drinking water is one of the very first elemental steps. So I was encouraged by it. Again, they're facing very long odds in dealing with those issues, but it was a problem that was broadly recognized. One of the things that we noticed was that every time we came to sample, there were more homeowners showing up from other homes around and saying, can you sample our well as well? And we try to accommodate that as much as possible. So I think the local communities, the local elected officials, and the public health officials are very much aware that there is a big problem. And I think a lot can be accomplished with education. There's always, of course, myths going around of what causes what. And so there are things that can be done. And I think those are probably better solutions than trying to come up with centralized edicts or regulatory frameworks that are just not attainable in the near future. Not that they are not important to drive long-term development, but in the near future, more education, which is really desired by the local communities, can go a long ways.
This is fantastic. We were supposed to have another colleague from IFAN, the Institut Fondamental d'Afrique Noire, who is working on, she's a, marine biologist working on the fishery, but also protected marine areas. So I wanted her to come and share her experience, but unfortunately, there was some scheduling. Well, hopefully we'll have her sometimes. But it would have been great for her to bring her own, because she also work on water and so I don't know if you have any other questions.
I'm sorry.
It's fantastic.
If I may share one more thing, it just occurred to me in the context of the overfishing. One of the other things that the Volta River is known for is actually intensive aquaculture. So these are big basketball court-sized nets that are being suspended in the river. And like so many other environmental issues, they're good and bad. They can help prevent some of the issues and alleviate some of the problems that the local fishing communities have. At the same time, they add a tremendous amount of nutrients to the water,
Yes.
and then cause problems for the mussel fisheries, which is downstream. So the mussels then get over-fertilized and die. So I think, again, these environmental degradation issues are incredibly complex, and as everybody pointed out, we really need to think of them as many parts of a continuum. There's climate change, there's population growth, that all need to be taken together. And I think sometimes a lot of small approaches can be more beneficial than trying to do something on a national or regional scale, because it does not take into consideration the local conditions on the ground and limitations and opportunities as well. Sorry, I just wanted to share that quickly.
Well, absolutely, I totally agree, and I think local engagement, kind of community engagement is very important. It reminds me of what happens, for example, 2 years ago in Senegal when the Pink Lake, which is one of the main attractions in Senegal, have been completely overtaken by flooding water because the state official hasn't, they didn't have any plan to at least this situation, and it kills tourism and the local economy. So, and I think thinking about solutions, more sustainable solutions, but also getting the community involved can be sometimes very helpful when it's come to at least, raising awareness, but also mobilizing people in a way that can also in those communities resilient, and thinking about solutions that can be enduring. So that's a big issue. That's a big. Well, thank you so much. This is fascinating. Alim?
Yes, guys, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Bodian, for your input. Very, very much appreciated. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Heiko. I don't know if you guys have any last words or any other questions.
I actually did have a question for Dr. Schoenfuss. When I was in the Western region, I passed through the Pra River and where it opens into the Gulf of Guinea, and it transports an immense amount of sediment, which is largely the result of artisanal gold mining. And I've heard that part of the process of extracting gold from the sediment involves the use of mercury, which in turn contaminates the river. I was wondering if that came up in your studies and and how that's being managed.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's one of the biggest problems with artisanal gold mining is the amount of mercury that's being released into the rivers with absolutely no regulation. This is actually one of those interesting examples where the large mining companies, although they're more visible and often get vilified for good reasons, do a better job because they're regulated and they're watched, while the artisanal gold mining is completely unregulated, often illegal, and the people engaged in it, which are often very poor, just do whatever they have to get some gold out of that, out of those tailings and ores. The problem with mercury in particular is the bioaccumulation of it. So when we're seeing the contamination, not only is it a local, direct, acute toxicity issue where animals downstream will just die and people exposed to it can develop very severe health responses, but that mercury is actually uptaken by the zooplankton, by the fish, and ultimately through the lagoon, which are often breeding grounds for young fish, make it all the way into the marine food chain and then become returned through the fishery that you mentioned into the local food stocks. And so it's a really tricky problem because, again, artisanal gold mining is not regulated. It's often illegal, so it's very hard to deal with it. And anytime you try to educate miners, they're immediately suspicious that you're coming from the government and maybe take away what little livelihood they have. So it's a very complex issue, but it is probably one of the biggest long-term impacts on the entire food chain in West Africa. It's not so much a problem on the eastern side because there's less gold and it's a more developed region. There, the sand mining has become a big issue. But mercury, yes, it shows up in unbelievably high concentrations in the western region, in the fisheries and also then in the fish that are being brought to the market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in Senegal, Kédougou is a good example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they also use mercury. What is cyanure? I don't know how we call it in English.
Cyanide.
Exactly. And it pollutes the Falémé, which is the only river that also feed the Lac de Guerre, where all the water in Dakar comes from. So the risk is very high. So it's a I totally agree. Well, a lot of things to say. So I didn't.
Yeah. Okay. Well, guys, thank you very much. If there's any more, there's no more comment or questions, I think we can wrap it up a little bit early. So I would like to thank you all for your time and your dedication to making this seminar happen. And I would like to wish you all a very pleasant weekend. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you
You
so
too.
much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
No problem.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you. Thank you, Hannah. It's good. Super.
Wow. Non, c'était bien. C'était bien.
Il n'y avait pas beaucoup de monde. Le sujet a été, oui, vraiment, c'est un grand sujet. C'est dommage que Fadi a retiré, mais c'est une des plus grandes. Hein?
Man amoon na ñaar ñu connecté mais après dañ mujjee dem quoi kenn ki dafa doon wax ne dafa am connexion problème.
Oui, ça doit être ça. Mais sinon, ça va? Tu viens d'arriver?
Ouais, ça va, alhamdulillah, tout se passe bien.
Tu t'installes bien, quoi?
Wow.
C'est bien.
Alhamdulillah.
C'est bien, c'est bien.
Wow.
Oui, nous, on est là. Wow, ça va, on est là, hein? On est là. Attends, il y a Léo qui est là. On est en train de travailler sur un ouvrage qu'on doit boucler.
Wow. Ok, alhamdulillah. Kon xam naa ci kanam ci deuxième réunion.
Parce que depuis presque 3 ans, on est travaillé. Ouais, mais on se recapte, c'est dans 1 heure, hein? Moins d'1 heure.
Oui, c'est dans 1 heure, Inch'Allah. Ouais.
Wow.
Ok,
donc à tout à l'heure.
Ok, Inch'Allah.